So our first case study is the Fair Food Programme, which really focused on the labour rights in Florida's tomato growing industry. We have a panel of 3 representing the different key stakeholders involved. We have Greg Asbed, who's the co-founder of the Coalition of Immokalee Workers. We have Miguel Rios, who's the Agricultural Enforcement Coordinator for the Southeast region of the United States of the Department of Labour. I think I can think of a few people who'd like the title of enforcer. But there's also Cheryl Queen, who's the Vice President of Communications at the Compass Group, which is one of the companies that's closely involved in the Fair Food Programme. I'm going to start by just giving literally a 1.5-minute summary of the case so that our colleagues here who are the experts can really delve into the key ways in which the success can be learnt from this. So, the Coalition of Immokalee Workers started 25 years ago as an organisation which was there to address poverty, wages and abuse in the Florida tomato growing industry. It started very much at farm level, but realised quickly that it had to start engaging with the systemic issues. And there it went to really speak to the major food brands, whose own purchasing power, of course, in that tomato supply chain, can either promote fair wages and humane labour standards, or it can drive poverty, wages and abuse. From this emerged the Fair Food Programme, which now is across 90% of the Florida tomato growing industry. And it's based on workers and business participation with the support of the US Labour Department. And through that participation, the Fair Food Programme enforces standards that are through binding legal contracts. So this is binding legal contracts between the workers' organisation and the retail purchasers, which is also overseen by the Fair Food Standard Council. It includes a worker-triggered complaint resolution mechanism that can lead to corrective action by growers, but also can lead to the suspension of the growers' membership. So there's some teeth in that. In terms of this being a powerful example of the protect, respect and remedy, I'd really just say that it has so many lessons to learn for cases around the world. This is about a very substantial supply chain going into very important and wealthy markets. So without further ado, I'd like to pass over to Greg, who will explain from the Coalition of Immokalee Workers your point of view. Thank you.
Thanks, Bill and Dante, for putting this incredible panel together, and for the opportunity to speak to you about the Fair Food Program and the worker-driven social responsibility model, of which it's a leading example. I will make one complaint. I noticed they put this panel in the room with the water damage on the ceiling, and that's exactly what happens with farm workers back in the United States too. So oh, that's art. My bad. Okay, never mind. Take that back. No, I know we have very strict time limits, so I'm not going to do that anymore. But in the U.S. real estate market, there's a very well-known saying that says the value of any given property is determined by 3 key things: location, location, and location. And I would posit that in the world of social responsibility, there's a very similar rule, except that when it comes to the protection of human rights in corporate supply chains, the 3 most important things are enforcement, enforcement, and you can probably guess the 3rd, enforcement. That is to say that the United Nations Human Rights Council actually got it right when it established remedy as the 3rd pillar, access by victims to effective remedy by both judicial and especially non-judicial means. While the first 2 pillars are important in assigning responsibility for protecting and respecting human rights in corporate supply chains, the 3rd, remedy, puts the focus squarely on the indispensable action of making universal human rights real. The Fair Food Program, established now in over 90% of the Florida tomato industry and in the process of expanding to 6 new states and 2 new crops as we speak, provides effective remedy for farm workers through a unique combination of mechanisms, including 1, a worker-drafted code of conduct, which includes the prohibition of particular abusive practices that workers experience in the workplace that are not covered by existing law and that are not known by experts outside of the industry. 2, worker-to-worker education on the rights under the code so that workers can be the informed frontline monitors of their own rights. 3, a 24-hour complaint line for the investigation and resolution of complaints, so that the abuses that workers identify can be quickly and effectively solved. 4, in-depth audits on participating farms to complement the education and complaint process and uncover abuses that workers may not be able to see themselves. And 5, market consequences for human rights violations established in binding legal agreements between the CIW and the brands, whereby companies like Cheryl's agree to only purchase produce from growers who are in good standing with the Fair Food Program as determined by the Fair Food Program. In concert, these mechanisms make enforcement possible in the Fair Food Program, enforcement that is, 1, driven by the workers themselves, the very humans whose human rights are in question, and so the stakeholders with the most compelling and abiding interest in seeing those rights protected. And 2, backed by market consequences, so that the employers know that the failure to comply will result in the swift and certain loss of sales, as is the case with other standards that the market truly cares about, such as food safety standards. The Fair Food Program also integrates the other pillars of the guiding principles. First, through the legally binding agreements with brands, the program engages corporate buyers in respecting human rights in their supply chain in a concrete and effective way. The agreements, again, requiring the brands to only purchase from suppliers in good standing with the program, provide a meaningful economic incentive to suppliers to value the human rights of their workforce, because their interest in maintaining access to the market that cares and has signed on to the Fair Food Principles is greater than any incentive for, or even indifference to, the continued exploitation of workers. And second, the Fair Food Program, through its focus on worker education and participation, has created an army of worker monitors, tens of thousands strong, many of whom have moved on to work in other sectors over the past several years. These mobile workers represent an invaluable resource for the monitoring of human rights beyond the 4 walls of the program, as they continue to refer complaints from their new places of employment. Because we do not have the same mechanisms for enforcement in those cases outside the program, we often share those complaints with the Department of Labor, providing the government with countless new eyes and ears on the ground for the protection of human rights in the broader agricultural industry, and allowing our public-private partnership to flourish. By the same token, the success of the FFP, the Fair Food Program, on the farms where it is in effect, serves to free up scarce public resources for enforcement and allows those resources to be directed at sectors where abuses remain common. I want to stress that none of this is theoretical. We have the proof out of the very same laboratory dubbed Ground Zero for modern-day slavery in the United States by federal prosecutors just a few short years ago. Since 2011, the Fair Food Program has eliminated, not just addressed, forced labor, sexual assault, and violence against workers in Florida's tomato industry, eliminating many of the worst actors from the industry in the process. And when lesser but still vexing violations like wage theft and health and safety problems occur, there's a complaint system in place to address them quickly and effectively that has resolved nearly 1,200 complaints in just 4 seasons. What's more, nearly $20 million have been added to farm payrolls in that same period through the program's Fair Food Premium, paid by the purchasers and passed on to workers by their employers in their weekly paychecks. Time clocks and shade are now required in the fields, and worker health and safety committees give workers a much-needed voice on the job for communicating and addressing their safety concerns. The program has been an unmatched success, making the limits on its expansion, which are due primarily to a lack of resources, the most important ongoing challenge we face today. Many of the brands already partnering with the program are eager to see it expand to cover more of their supply chains, including Cheryl's company, Compass Group, which voluntarily committed earlier this season to support that expansion. But there's a fundamental tension between expansion and the integrity of the Fair Food Program, a tension caused by the program's resource-intensive focus on enforcement. In short, real human rights protections can be achieved efficiently, but they cannot be achieved on the cheap. We're working diligently today on developing alternative sources of revenue that will allow the program to grow and expand its protections to, potentially, millions of workers in new crops in new states and even new countries. Finally, tensions between the CIW and the corporate purchasers, on the other hand, remain an issue only for those buyers who remain outside the program, or companies, as we like to call them, future partners. Though the good news is that tension is also being increasingly relieved as the program continues to operate and prove its effectiveness. Many of the companies that have come on board since the program was implemented in 2011 have done so voluntarily, including Walmart, drawn by the proven ability of the program to actually eliminate human rights abuses, not just to provide a public relations fig leaf when unaddressed abuses inevitably come to light. So to wrap up, the Fair Food Program and the worker-driven social responsibility model, of which it is a proven example, are distinguished by their laser focus on enforcement, an approach we affectionately call enforcement obsessed inside the program. That enforcement is driven by the informed participation of workers themselves, whose role as frontline defenders of their own rights ensures wall-to-wall monitoring of the program's human rights-based code of conduct, and is reinforced by the market power of the participating buyers, whose commitment to only purchase from growers in good standing with the program gives the model its teeth.
Thank you very much. And that's an excellent exposition of, I think, some of the most important lessons that have come out, so thank you.